That thing about being isolated and staying in your world a little bit, it can be dangerous, not in a dramatic way, but you're in this echo chamber kind of thing and you don't really grow very much. And I remember having a director in the room and he goes, "Oh, no, we should make it really, really yellow." And in my brain, I was going, "Nah, that's going to look really bad. It's going to look really, really bad." But practicing being a professional, I said, "Sure, let's give it a go." It looked freaking amazing. And it was such a good lesson to me, to that thing about not staying in your own little bubble and listening to other people. Because at the end of the day, we're creative people and we want to do what we do. But first of all, it's not our project. It's somebody else's project and we're there to help them. But second of all, that's the whole thing about collaboration and about getting outside of that bubble and listening to other people.
Welcome to Color and Coffee, a podcast that focuses on the craft of color grading and the artist behind it. I'm your host, Jason Bowdacious, and each week we'll sit down with some of the most talented and creative colorists in the industry and have a casual chat from one colorist to another. We'll share their stories, their insights, their grading tips, and of course, their beverage of choice. Whether you're a seasoned colorist or just starting out in the industry, join us for some great color discussion. Strap in, grab your mug. You're listening to Color and Coffee. Hi, and welcome to another episode in Color and Coffee. I'm so happy to have you guys with me today. As we approach the end of our first season, I just wanted to thank you guys for joining me for casual color chat from one professional to another. Now, I have a really good friend with me, senior colorist Vincent Taylor. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, mate. It's good to be here.
Thank you so much for coming on the show, Vincent. So the first and possibly most important question I have for you today is, what are you drinking today?
Because I've listened to episodes prior, I gave this a lot of thought and put myself under a lot of pressure, actually. I am drinking. It's hard, man, because it is coffee. It's a brew from Chamberlain Coffee and it's kind of roasted in LA. The big decision for me though is, because I drink it with oat milk, what sort of oat milk to use? And it's hard. But anyway, that's what I'm drinking. It's what does it say? I even wrote it down. It's a dark roast, sweet caramel and dark chocolate. Cheers.
I so appreciate, cheers, my friend. Oh, and a small cup too. I so appreciate the thought you put into that. I need to put more thought into my coffee. I'm drinking a pretty generic roast today out of my Make It Happen cup. And I am drinking with almond milk. I can't have my regular milk because, lactose intolerant. But I'm going to have to check that out because you, as a LA local, have just given me a great recommendation for coffee. So Chamberlain Coffee, I'll be checking that out. And we'll see if we have that by next
it's nice,
episode.
Actually. It is good. And look, it makes me sound like such a coffee snob. And the only reason I gave it that much thought is because I knew you were going to ask me about it. So, so I cheated a little bit.
It's fine. Sometimes we are allowed to be snobs about certain things in life. And if you're going to be a snob about something, coffee is a good thing to be a snob about.
It's not a bad one, is it? It's not a bad one.
No, certainly. Yeah. I invited you on the show today because you recently went back to being freelance. And I'd love to chat more about that. But before we dive into that, I'd love to hear a little bit about, where did you come up? How did Vincent Taylor get into being a colorist?
It's been a long time. I've been, it's just shy of 25 years I've been grading. So I come through kind of film days and I trained as a DP, as a cinematographer. Again, it was 35 mil, 60 mil kind of world. I was pretty young in that world. I was very green. I'd only been shooting for maybe about 3 years, 4 years maybe. And then had about, if I'm putting all the cards on the table, had about 4 jobs in a row that were just pretty unpleasant. And I went, you know what? Maybe this is not for me. And so I retired early. Well, I didn't retire. I didn't know what to do. So I went and managed a bar for a year. This is in Australia. And then a friend of mine, Carol, she said, "Oh, we're doing this short film. I'd love you to shoot it." And I went, "Oh, I don't know. I'm retired, And she goes, "Oh, come on. These people are working on it." It was a really fun shoot. And I was really glad I did it. But anyway, we took that in for Tallycine, to the Post House in Melbourne that I always went to.
So it was pre-digital.
This is pre-digital. Oh, yeah. And they said, "Where have you been? You kind of disappeared." And I said, I don't know. I'm finding my way, And then about 6-7 weeks later, they reached out to me and said, "Listen, we want to get somebody else, want to train somebody else up." And normally those people come through the tape room and work their way through that way. But we thought it might be really interesting to have someone come from a DP background with your lighting experience. What do you think? And I said, I don't know, maybe. And so we gave it a trial. We gave it like a 3-month trial, and I freaking loved it. It was like I was still lighting and still kind of creating and still working with filmmakers, but it just had this other bent. And because I was still dealing with film and I could even still use filters in the telecine chain, duck to water. So that's kind of how I got into it.
It's so interesting to hear how everybody gets into this industry and specifically this profession differently. I also had a similar set to suite moment where I spent a little bit of time on set much earlier. I wasn't doing DP work, but basically I very quickly learned that my spot and my area in this profession was definitely not on set. And as soon as I got into the post suite, I also, like you, discovered, oh my God, this is where I belong. Aside from the air conditioning, I can do similar things that I was doing on set, but I'm able to control it in a way that I feel that the tools are for me. And I'm sure that DPs feel that way too, vice versa though. Super interesting that you had that moment. So where did you go after that?
I stayed in that world, really. I was being trained up by VG, and I'm not going to try and butcher his last name because it's such a beautiful last name. VG kind of trained me for a couple of years, but then he had to go back to Singapore for family reasons. And so I was in the hot seat. Boy, was I in the hot seat. I was grading on a system. It was an Ursa Gold telecine machine and a Poggle grading suite, I suppose you'd call it. And this is playing stuff out to tape and even out to U-matic and things like that. So baptism by fire, pretty much. I'd certainly learnt some essentials from VG, like some really, really important essentials from VG. But the rest was me making it up as I go. So I stayed there for, I can't remember how long. I was there for quite a while and then changed states in Australia. So that was in Melbourne, and then I moved up to Sydney, went to another post house. And that was interesting. Again, that was another learning curve because I had been working on the one telecine suite with the Ursa. And then at, man, my mind's gone blank. I can't actually remember the name of the place. Digital Pictures, I think it was called. No, it was called The Lab back then. And it was a huge place, but there was so many chains there. I was still working on Ursa, but the other suite was a Spirit telecine, and then we had a C Reality. I was having to change gear constantly because one day you're in one suite, one day you're in another. And sure, there's similarities, but there's enough variations that kept you on your toes. So that learning curve kind of kept going. It was only in the last 2 years at that company that they kind of got the first base layer. So it's the first non-linear grading that I'd ever done. That was quite something. Just when I thought I was just getting to the precipice of a learning curve. But it was great. It was fantastic. I loved it.
So tell me about the transition from operating hardware telecine machines to your first non-linear experience on the baseline. Because a lot of us came up working on nonlinear editing and nonlinear grading systems like DaVinci, and we don't necessarily have the experience of what it was like, that massive moment where we're working and going from film where you have to work, you're working with filters, everything is physical in your hands, over to a nonlinear where you're starting to work with software. Of course, there is some hardware in there, but you're now being introduced to the software grading that now entirely runs our industry.
I think the first knee-jerk response to that is all of a sudden I just had so many more tools to work with. And I might even say too many because it was a little bit overwhelming. One of the first things I ever graded in a non-linear on the basslight was a music clip for a band called Empire of the Sun, Walking on a Dream, I think the song was. And man, I pretty much used every tool in the toolbox just to kind of make it work. It was good because I went, I could do this. It got a little bit out of control because all of a sudden it's like, midnight and you're still going, I'm only 5 shots in, shit. So my first response would be just the tool set was insane. The fact that you could draw a shape, that you weren't just limited to just a circle and just a square. Although I temper that really quickly with that foundation of being limited just with simpler tools in a telecine day is a really fantastic foundation. And I think a lot of colorists miss out on that foundation. I think you're more creative with limited tools. That said, of course, when you've got all these other things to play with, you just go to town. The other thing, of course, the obvious one, going from linear to non-linear, is not having to rewind. Oh, where's that shot of the car? Oh, shit, it's on reel 2. And so you have to rewind the telecine chain, roll the film back, put the next one up, clean everything, put it on, and then find out you're on the wrong roll. So that's pretty cool, just being able to jump between shots. And I know all that sounds so simple now, and it wasn't that long ago in the scheme of things.
There's a couple of things I want to touch on there. The creativity through limitation, that's something that I think a lot of people can relate with, in the fact that when you're given limited tools, you are forced to be creative. And some of the solutions you come up with can be almost a genius in their simplicity because they just work. And once you've figured it out, you're almost like, wow, I can't believe I didn't see that in the first place. And even given more tools, you're almost like the solutions are right there. I don't need more tools. That's it. And the creative solution is what it's supposed to be.
The KISS principle of keep it simple, stupid, it's so important. And yes, you can use a lot of amazing tools these days, and that's fine. You can still do that. But I think initially in that first pass, keep it simple. I always try and grade just in primaries to start with and just get everything matching. I would never touch any secondaries until I'm well into a second pass.
I saw the smile on your face as soon as you mentioned Baselight and the expansive tool set that you were introduced to. And I think myself and our listeners can completely relate to that, as Resolve, soon to be, I have a feeling we have a new version dropping this week, has an enormous, almost overwhelming tool set. And when people first get into it, it's, oh my God, I can key and qualify and I have Magic Mask and I have OFX tools. And the first inclination is to go and isolate everything, do very specific adjustments, when the first thing you probably should be doing is the largest, most simple pass that you can do on the entire scene or the entire picture to keep it as simple and consistent as possible.
I think that's spot on. And something else that is really important, even before you get to the tools, is to just watch what you're about to grade. Just watch it. Just watch it. If you've got time, if it's not too long, watch it a couple of times. I've done a little bit of training from time to time over the years. And the biggest thing I learned from that is how much I am asking questions when I'm grading of myself. Constantly. This is something I learned back in school days when I was studying art history, that thing about, oh, I don't like that painting. Okay, why don't you like it? Or I do like that painting. Okay, what do you like about it? And that leads to another question. And same with your grading. When you watch a flat pass or you watch a project, obviously the first thing you're looking at is color correction, not grading. Will I be able to match these shots? If not, why? And then you start going, oh, that's because that was shot on a GoPro and that was, and so all of a sudden, all these questions start firing out. And that's something I love about it, because you constantly, and even when you've finished and you're watching it, you're going, something not right. Why? What is it that's not right? And has it met the brief? And you're talking about my smile. I get really excited and I get really passionate. Even though I've been doing it for a long time, I still love it so much because of all those variables.
Everybody who's met you is able to see that. It's a natural curiosity. And I think that's really important in our profession, is having a natural curiosity, not just for the technology and not just for the film and the art, but just on the human condition. Why are you reacting that way? Why do these shots, like you mentioned, why do these shots not match? Why am I feeling that hit between these two shots? Is it contrast? Is it color? And it's less about the camera type, but also it's just take a step back and feel what is going on in my head or my eyes. And that's why I think this profession is so interesting. So moving forward, you're on the Baselight now. How did you transition from that to Los Angeles?
There was quite a few steps in between that. I hopped around over the years to various companies, depending on where I was moving for either family reasons or whatever. Eventually, I was working for a company back in Melbourne. And then in Australia, we use the term retrenched. Here, they call it downscaling, or basically I lost my job, right? And I went, oh, fuck, what am I going to do? And it was just at that time where DaVinci Resolve was being made more available. And actually at that stage, I was on Luster. So I'd gone from Poggle to DaVinci 2K to Baselight, then back to Resolve, and then I was on Luster. But it was just that time where it was conceivable to get your own system. And so I went, oh, what am I going to do? I'm not a very technical colorist, so it was quite scary for me, the idea of getting my own system. And I look at my mate who builds computers and stuff like that. I don't know. I'm going, is it the right computer? But anyway, I took the plunge and I set up as a freelance colorist in Melbourne. And at that stage, it was literally just on that little fulcrum, I was the first freelance colorist in Australia. But I had about 18 months of that little window of being a freelance colorist, and I was busy, man. I was just like, it was going boom, boom, boom. So I had a teeny tiny little studio where I'd do my own stuff, and then of course I'd go out to other people's places and do work for them as well. And that was a wonderful learning curve. I keep coming back to learning curves, don't I? So I did that. I was busy. And then a friend of mine who I used to work with in Sydney was then working at Technicolor in Shanghai. And he said, "Oh, can you come over and freelance for like 5 weeks in Shanghai?" And I went, "Man, that's a long time, because we just had a little kid then." And I went, "Oh, all right." So anyway, went and did that. And then at the end of that time, he said, "Actually, would you be interested in staying?" And I said, "Oh, no, man, I've got a little kid." So I Skyped with my wife that time. You'll never guess what they asked me. They asked me to stay. And she said, my wife said, "Why don't we do it? Why don't we do it? It'd be an adventure." She's much braver than me. So we did. We packed up and we moved to Technicolor in Shanghai. And I was there for 3 years. It was amazing. It was amazing on so many levels. Again, cutting the story short, but at the end of the 3 years, it was like, because it was full on. That work-life balance there wasn't a lot of separation. So at the end of 3 years, it's like, okay, I need a break. I need to kind of change gears a little bit. But we weren't ready to go back to Australia. And then in that same kind of time, that 2-week period, I got invited to work for a small company in New York. And we went, all right, let's do it. So then, hopped there. And then ultimately, that's where we ended up in LA, because we were in New York for 5 years and then ended up in LA. So...
Well, that's fantastic.
Right. And I am, sunny LA. Look at my suntan.
The trip all around the world, essentially.
Yeah, and it's been fantastic. It's been really interesting working at not only different companies but in different environments. And it's interesting now. So I was working at the Harbour Picture Company up until a little while back, and then they downscaled partially due to the strikes, partially for a bit quiet as well. And here I am back in the freelance seat. So it's like, I vaguely remember this.
Well, I want to talk about that a little bit. Anybody that's worked at a larger scale post house knows that there is some security, but it's also a significant workload. As you mentioned, there's the work-life balance concerns, and it's very, very difficult. But there's other concerns when you're working freelance. So now you're entering the freelance market. I know you were just signed by Color Nation. You were signed by TBD. So how does that work when you're working, when you're signed by a certain company and you're still working freelance?
Well, my first cheeky response is I'll let you know, because I'm still working it out. But in the first instance, I work as a freelance, like I've set myself up as an LLC company. And then I was invited by those two companies you mentioned, and also another one in Australia called the Color Suite, to be on their roster. And initially, when I kind of put that out in the world, a few people went, "Oh, congratulations. Oh, it's a shame you're not freelance anymore." And I went, No. Time out. I'm still freelance. You can still, But what that means is that because you're under their umbrella, is that a lot of that, I want to say, knocking on doors or whatever it is to go, "Hey, anything going on? What's happening work-wise?" They're kind of doing that in the background for you. And you've also got the support of their contacts, just that little safety net of sorts. So I'm kind of running that in parallel to being freelance on my own terms as well. And we'll see how it goes. I'm excited and scared at the same time.
That's truly fantastic. I think that feeling of both being scared and excited is the best feeling. You're doing something right when you're both a little bit scared and a little bit excited. You've knocked on the right door and the door is open. So I think you're doing the correct things, and I'm excited for you. So with these companies, you're essentially working remote. I assume you're not working on site, correct?
Well, at this stage, there's a couple of other companies that as time goes on, I might potentially do work in their place as well. But for the most part, at the moment, I'm doing remote workflows.
In 2023, it does appear that remote has gotten far, far easier than it used to be. I want to say even like pre-COVID, like 3 or 4 years ago.
Oh, yeah, 100%. Absolutely agree.
You're able to get both support and essentially get client work done completely remote for the most part, except for, I assume, reviews, which you do assisted. And then if you need assistance through client services and stuff, you have support through either Color Nation or TBD, etc.
Yeah, actually, that's an interesting thing to touch on. I mentioned earlier that I'm not what I would consider to be a super technical colorist. And so it does open that idea that if a bigger job comes along, whether or not I need to get some help from an assistant or something like that. And I don't know yet. I haven't come up to that as a problem or option, whatever you want to call it. But I would imagine that for a bigger project, that would be something I would have to do. Now, how I would do that remotely is something I've got to try and work out. But honestly, there's so many more options, like you said, but even to a few years ago, you can use Lucid or something like that to have all your files and kind of remote in and, but just like what we were talking about with the so-called simpler times of telecine with lesser tools versus more tools. Both have pros and cons with working remotely and working face to face. I find you have to tiptoe a lot more carefully with your clients because things can get misunderstood on either in a Zoom environment or even just doing Frame.io uploads and stuff like that. I know that one of the first jobs I did as a freelancer, this is only about a month ago, and I want to say I misunderstood the brief. It's not quite what happened, but there was a little bit more involved than I had anticipated. And if it was a face-to-face kind of thing where you had people in the room, I don't think that would have happened. I think I would have got that brief a lot clearer. So yeah, so that you've got to tread carefully, I think, in a remote kind of environment.
First, I'll say I've absolutely been there. I happen to be a little bit more of a technical colorist, but I talk to a lot of people that are not strong in the technical area, but they're far better creatively than I am. And I think that's amazing that you're able to essentially expand your team and get access to people that
I've got to stop you, man. I've got to stop you because I have problems with the word better.
Oh,
Yeah, I'm not gonna let you get away with that one because
let's talk about that.
well, it's important, you know, because and that works both ways. Because for so many years, I would put myself down because I'm not technical. I don't really understand. I don't understand this. And then the flip side, which is that thing about going, oh, I'm not as creative. I'm more technical. I don't think one is better. They're just different ways of grading. They serve the same end goal, which is getting that story told. I jump on that because I don't like better, one being better or one being worse. They're just different ways. So
I love that. Thank you so much for calling me out on that. I greatly appreciate that.
yeah, it's true though, man, because it's like there's enough people out in the world who will find a way to put things down or make things lesser, and we shouldn't do it to ourselves. What we do is it's a really tough job. It's fun. Don't get me wrong. It's really fun, but it's tough. This is going off on a segue, but it's an important one. The major difference from 20 years ago when I was grading to now, this is a huge one, is there's such a big community. I know that I could reach out to someone like you or someone like Cullen or and just say, oh, what the heck? Why doesn't this work? That never used to exist. So even though it's sometimes a bit much, all the forums and all the different tutorials and people training and people offering some dangerous advice, it's mostly positive.
I think the colorist community is incredibly helpful. It's one of the things that it's what pushed me into being a colorist, was the fact that the black art of being a colorist started to disappear a little bit, and it started to be less nebulous. It was becoming much more solid, and it is much more approachable now. Yes, there's less mentorship opportunities, but the availability of being able to learn, not just the software, because learning Resolve, learning Baselight, learning the tools of the trade is one thing, but learning the art of grading, learning the art of understanding, manipulating color, what it does to us psychologically, has become much more approachable. And to me, that was when the doors opened. And I was like, oh my God, I can, instead of just being a filmmaker that does all these different things, I can step into this niche. There is a profession here that I can tell stories with color. And that to me was when I felt comfortable stepping away from, and a lot of people have trouble with this. I want to be a director, a writer, an editor. Which one do I want to do professionally? To me, the doors really opened when I saw, you know what? There is not only a profession in here, but a way to get into it. Because a lot of people, as filmmakers, when I got out of college, I wanted to be a VFX artist, but there's a lot more training on that. And it was, you get After Effects and you just mess around with it. But to me, I actually loved color, and it took me a number of years to discover that. And it wasn't until I discovered things like mixing light that I really sort of connected with that in here, deep inside. And I was like, you know what? It was the community, exactly. And when I found people like on Lift Gamma Gain, that I started to realize that this was not only the place for me, but there are opportunities for me to give back. And that's when I got into training as well. So I love that you talked about the community, and that you mentioned that not only are there people that are willing to give, but that it continues to expand as the years go further.
Definitely the majority of people are very generous in what they want to share, and we all like seeing people do great things and I don't know. It makes me really happy. There's exceptions. There's still the old school people who go, no, this is the way I do it, and you can't see how I do it. And that's fine. Good luck to them. And you do what you do. You march to the beat of your own drum.
I know you run a podcast also. I'd like to hear a little bit more about it. Speaking about giving back.
It's funny you should mention this. I am lucky enough to be on the last episode of this season for your podcast. And so I think I should put you on the spot right now. And I've got my last episode coming up soon and see if you can return the favor and come on my show. What do you reckon?
I would be more than happy to. It would be an honor.
All right, thank you. I was thinking about it this morning, and then I had to look up the word nepotism, and I'm going, hang on a second, we're just pals, but that would make me really happy. I mean, I met you, I think we chatted quite a few times here and there, but I met you for the first time only this year at NAB, and you're such a nice fella, and you're so good at interviewing because you're really good at listening. You asked me about with my podcast, and from what you told me just before we started this conversation, the reason you got into it is pretty much the same reason I did too, because you end up having these fantastic chats with people and you go, man, this is really interesting. Well, at least it is to us. It's really interesting. And it seems like a natural thing to do. And especially if you love a good conversation, which I really do. The thing I'm doing is I'm kind of chatting to professionals who work with color. So not just colorists, also talking to artists. And I even chatted to a psychic who sees color auras and things like that. So I'm really interested in that side of it, but ultimately it's an excuse just to chat to people and just kind of get in their brains and find out what's going on.
That's why I found your podcast so interesting, because it reminds us that our craft is not just about color. It's not just about software. It's not just about hardware and twisting knobs. There's so much more to it. It's about understanding the psychology, the physiology, the way that our eyes work. It's about so much more. And listening to different episodes of your podcast reminded me that you have to keep an open mind. You can't just stay in a dark room. It's about taking in the world outside. It's about being fascinated by the things around you.
100%. That thing about being isolated and staying in your world a little bit, it can be dangerous, not in a dramatic way, but you're in this echo chamber kind of thing and you don't really grow very much. I remember, I'll give you an anecdote which is kind of related, but I also just really like the anecdote because it taught me so much when I was just learning. I'd only been grading that couple of years. My confidence was starting to build, which is important. It's an important part of being a colorist to have that confidence. Mm-hmm. And I remember having a director in the room and he goes, oh, no, we should make it really, really yellow. And in my brain, I was going, nah, that's going to look really bad. It's going to look really, really bad. But practicing being a professional, I said, sure, let's give it a go. It looked freaking amazing. And it was such a good lesson to me, to that thing about not staying in your own little bubble and listening to other people. And, because at the end of the day, we're creative people and we want to do what we do. But first of all, it's not our project. It's somebody else's project and we're there to help them. But second of all, that's the whole thing about collaboration and about getting outside of that bubble and listening to other people. It's one of the things I do like about, even though I mentioned that they're dangerous, there's all these different YouTube videos out there, but it's really nice to see what people are experimenting with and playing with. And you kind of go, I'd never thought of that. Or
it's funny you mentioned watching the way that other people work, because I am fascinated at watching other people work, the way other people grade, the way they set up their nodes, the way they approach things. Because for me, I love happy accidents. And yes, the technical part of me might be screaming, that's not the way you do it. That's the wrong LUT. That's the wrong color space or whatever that technical part of me. But what I'm looking for is an interesting approach, an interesting mindset, an interesting technique that I just would say, I would have never done that. I should approach it that way and see where it goes, just like you did with that yellow push. Because like you said, it's a collaboration. And this all comes from me being obsessed with watching behind the scenes videos that are never included on Blu-rays anymore, but they used to be huge on DVDs. Some of my favorite films and some of my favorite scenes come from happy accidents, things that were not set up that way. And if you are just driving that train forward, you're never going to leave room for happy accidents. Happy accidents happen when you're free flowing.
You've reminded me of something, the Film Like Color Awards that are out there in the world. One of the categories that I think that they should have is to give people the same footage, like, make it a 30-second commercial, and then let people go for it. Give them a brief, but a very simple brief so they can dance around that, and then judge that, because then you're judging everyone from the same footage. I think that would be a really interesting kind of thing.
It's a really interesting approach. I really like the 24 or 48 hour film festivals. And I think there would be interesting, like a grade off of like, how do you go about this? Not like being competitive, but like, I would have never balanced it like that, or I would have never windowed it like that. And it's such a reminder to like take in the way others work. And like I said earlier in the podcast, this career is about constantly learning. The second you put your stake in the ground and go, you know what, I'm done. I have absorbed everything I need to absorb and I'm perfectly set. It's not fun to work with somebody like that.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that's exactly it, because you're always learning. You're always kind of getting better. Actually, the other thing I like about that idea is, as far as everyone working off the same footage, is then you get to also see the skill of color matching, which that gets forgotten, how integral that is in what we do. If you can match a GoPro with a bloody Arri or something like that, then yeah, you're doing a good job.
No matter how good you are at look creation, camera matching and shot matching is easily the hardest thing that we do. And I'd say it's like 70% of what we do. And if you've done it right, you never see it. It just works. That's the beauty of it. So as we start to approach the end of our time together, I have another question that I ask every guest on this show, and it's our Desert Island Challenge. So if I were to take you and essentially take you back to your earlier days where you have less tools, unlike what we have in Resolve today, and banish you to a desert island, you only have one tool that you could take with you to work on your current jobs. And it can be any of the tools in Resolve. What would that tool be?
I think it might be a conversational tool that I would take with me. I'm being annoying because what I would do is I would actually try and find a way to get the tool of conversation happening again, because I'm finding more and more that filmmakers or agencies or whoever are kind of coming and saying, here you go, here's references, make it look like that. And I've had people give me references of something that I've graded. And it's like, guess what? We discovered that grade. We built that grade. We made that grade. We did it from scratch. And I miss that. I miss finding a grade or having that conversation before the project's even shot. So yeah, I'm being annoying by dodging the question, but that one tool that I really love and miss is having a dialogue. And it's not gone completely. There's still people who definitely do it, but a lot more people are going either telling me how to grade by giving me references or something like that, or not even having the conversation and just going, make it look like this. And it's just like, which of course I can do, but where's the fun in that? So there you go. There's a really shitty way to answer your question.
I actually like that a lot more than I originally thought I would, because I used to love that conversation. Actually, that's not true. I still love that conversation because it's so fun, and it's that process of discovery like we were talking about earlier.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. It's something that I like to think people come to me. There's so many amazing colorists out there. It's ridiculous how many amazing colorists are out there. And I would like to think people come to me because of whatever it is that I bring to a project. Yes, I've got, from a technical standpoint, I can get the job done to your brief. But it would be nice that they also came to go, well, you bring something else to it than this person. And you won't get that unless we have that artistic conversation.
Just to bring it back to what I was talking about earlier, you leave no room for those happy accidents where we can discover your unique look for that project, or you can trip on it and go, there it is. We found it. And it's just, that doesn't look like what you gave me. We got to keep going. Yeah. So, Vincent, where can we find you on the internet, your website, on Instagram? If people wanted to learn more about you and your podcast, how can we discover more about that?
You can type in vincenttaylorcolor.com to your friendly search engine. There you'll find my website. You can also find me through Color Nation or TBD or the Color Suite in Australia, but Color spelled COLOUR. And then as far as podcasts go, just look up the Color Timer podcast and have a little listen and see what you think.
Fantastic. All of those will be in the show notes for those that are interested. I highly recommend that you check those out, especially the Color Timer podcast. I'm a big fan, especially of the logo. And that about wraps it up for this episode of Color and Coffee. Thank you so much, Vincent, for joining us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to hold you to it. You're coming on my show.
Absolutely. I will make sure to jump on your show shortly. So thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Color and Coffee. We'll see you guys next time. Have an excellent day, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. And that's our show. Be sure to follow us on Instagram, YouTube, or your podcast app of choice. If you're using Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please leave us a review. It helps us quite a bit. If you are looking for DaVinci Resolve tools, please be sure to visit our sponsor, Pixel Tools. We'll see you guys in 2 weeks with another great interview. Happy grading.